For decades, Disney was known for magic kingdoms and innocent fairy tales until 1980, when the studio stepped into a forest it couldn't control. The Watcher in the Woods followed the strange disappearance of a young girl during a ritual gone wrong, a mystery that haunted everyone who entered those shadowed trees. What began as a bold experiment quickly unraveled into panic, rewrites, and a film so unsettling that audiences demanded it be pulled from theaters. Why did Disney hide multiple endings? What truth were they afraid to show? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about The Watcher in the Woods. Fact 1. When Disney crossed into a darkness it didn't understand. When Disney greenlit The Watcher in the Woods, the studio wasn't chasing horror, it was chasing survival. By the late 1970 seconds, Disney was losing the audience it once owned. Teenagers had abandoned the studio. Adults saw it as childish. Executives feared Disney would become a relic. In desperation, they approved something that violated every unwritten rule the company lived by, a supernatural thriller rooted in occult symbolism and a disappearance inside a haunted forest. What makes this fact strange isn't that Disney tried something new, it's that they tried something they didn't understand. Internal memos describe early drafts as too ritualistic, too metaphysical, and too dark for the brand, yet the studio kept pushing forward as if hypnotized by the idea of reinvention. Directors, writers, and designers all reported a tug-of-war between a corporate identity built on innocence and a story whispering about otherworldly forces, dimensional rifts, and a girl swallowed by an unseen presence. Disney's British production partners encouraged the darkness, believing the European sensibility would elevate the film beyond the typical American ghost story. They were right, the atmosphere became suffocating, dreamlike, and unsettling. But executives back home panicked. They wanted fear, but not this kind of fear. Not the kind that suggested the universe had cracks and something intelligent lived between them. The strange irony. Every time Disney tried to soften the film, it only made the remaining elements feel more unnatural. Cutting overt occult references made The Watcher harder to interpret. Reducing the ritual's explanation made Karen's disappearance more disturbing. They didn't brighten the movie, they hollowed it, leaving a strange, echoing dread. Few viewers realized it, but The Watcher in the Woods isn't simply a horror film by Disney. It is a document of a studio wrestling with its own shadow, accidentally revealing how frightening Disney becomes when it tries to hide the darkness rather than embrace it. Fact 2. The haunting presence. Bette Davis brought to the set. Bette Davis was hired for her legacy, but what she brought to the set of The Watcher in the Woods was something far heavier. Crew members said her presence changed the atmosphere the moment she stepped into a room. It wasn't theatrical, it wasn't diva behavior. It was as if she carried decades of unresolved memories, personal grief, industry battles, the weight of survival in old Hollywood, and all of it bled directly into her character, Mrs. Aylwood. Davis didn't smile much on set. She spoke quietly, observed everything, and maintained an emotional distance from the younger cast. Actors who worked with her described the experience as being watched by someone who knew a secret you weren't ready to hear. Her gaze in the film wasn't performance. It was Davis reaching into something real inside herself. When she spoke of her fictional daughter, Karen, several crew members swore her voice cracked like she was remembering someone she had truly lost. What unsettled the crew even more was her behavior during takes involving mirrors or reflective surfaces. Davis would stay silent, gripping her cane, staring into reflections long after the director yelled cut. One assistant claimed she whispered something to herself every time he never caught the words, but he said they sounded like an apology. Whether that was superstition, character immersion, or something deeper, no one knew. Disney expected Davis to lend prestige. Instead, she intensified the film's aura, grounding the supernatural elements in a human sorrow that felt disturbingly authentic. In many ways, she became the emotional anchor of the movie, yet also its most haunting mystery. Some in the crew later said the film wasn't truly about the Watcher or the ritual, it was about a mother who never stopped grieving. And Bette Davis, intentionally or not, made that grief feel ancient, unspoken, and dangerously close to truth. Fact 3. The original script that went far beyond what Disney expected. Before Disney sanitized The Watcher in the Woods into something ambiguous and family-friendly, the original script was a far stranger, darker artifact. The early drafts, now nearly impossible to find, described Karen's disappearance not as an accident, but as the result of a deliberate ritual attempting to breach an interdimensional barrier. The children weren't simply playing a game, they were reenacting a forbidden rite inspired by European occult traditions that fascinated writers in the late 1970s. Disney executives recoiled the moment they saw references to sigils, mirrored gateways, and invocations that felt uncomfortably close to real-world esoteric practices. In one version, the forest wasn't just a setting, it was a liminal zone where the veil weakened every few decades. Karen didn't vanish, she was taken, suspended in a state between existence and non-existence. The Watcher wasn't an alien or a spirit, but a consciousness tied to that threshold, observing humanity with an intelligence neither benevolent nor malicious. Internal notes revealed that the studio demanded entire sections be rewritten overnight. A meeting reportedly ended with pages being ripped out of the script and destroyed on the spot. The mandate was clear: no satanic imagery, no explicit rituals, no references to summoning or sacrifice. But removing these elements created a vacuum the rewrite struggled to fill. Without a clear mythology, the story began to feel dreamlike, fragmented, an aesthetic that accidentally made the film eerier. One writer later admitted that the sanitized script was the ghost of a darker film. Whispers of the original intent remain in the final cut: the blindfold, the circle of friends, the sudden gusts of wind, and the sense that something ancient is mimicking human gestures without fully understanding them. The strangest part? Decades later, fragments of the early drafts resurfaced in private collections. Scholars who read them insisted the original film, had it been made, would have been too disturbing for Disney to distribute. Not because it was violent, but because it suggested humanity was never alone, only watched. Fact 4. When the forest began behaving like it had a mind of its own. The production team chose Burnham Beaches for its twisted trees and natural fog, believing the forest would give the film an ethereal, haunted quality. What they didn't expect was how violently the environment would resist them. Almost from the first day, the forest seemed to behave with a will of its own. Lights malfunctioned, fog machines failed only when positioned near certain clearings, and gusts of wind would rise without warning, powerful enough to knock over equipment, but strangely localized, affecting only the area where the actors stood. Crew members reported hearing movement in the woods even when security confirmed no one else was present. Sometimes branches snapped in the distance, other times they bent inward as if something unseen were pushing through them. One cinematographer said he felt watched constantly, not in the metaphorical sense, but with the physical sensation of eyes studying him from behind trees. On several occasions, the forest interfered directly with filming. A large branch fell inches from a child actress during a scene that involved Karen's disappearance, prompting a temporary shutdown. A windstorm erupted during a ritual reenactment, violent enough to distort audio, but stopping abruptly the moment the director cut the scene. Some crew believed these occurrences were coincidences, but others whispered that the forest was responding to the story they were trying to tell. The strangest incident involved a reflective panel placed near a cluster of old trees. The panel repeatedly fogged over, despite clear weather and no logical cause. When wiped clean, it showed shadows that didn't correspond to any crew member or prop. The final time they attempted the shot, the panel cracked from the inside outward, as though pressure had built beneath its surface. Whether these events were nature, stress, or something stranger, the crew left Burnham Beaches convinced of one thing: the forest had moods, and it did not always welcome them. Fact 5. Practical effects that look too real for audience comfort. Before CGI existed, supernatural elements had to feel tactile, and in The Watcher in the Woods, that realism became a problem. Disney's effects team used a combination of glass reflections, layered smoke, rotating lights, and physical rigs to create distortions mimicking dimensional breaches. These effects were crafted to be subtle, but once projected in theaters, they appeared disturbingly authentic. One infamous example was the mirror distortion used in the seance sequence. The production achieved it by placing two reflective surfaces at slightly mismatched angles, allowing the actress's face to split and reform in ways the human eye wasn't accustomed to seeing. During test screenings, several viewers reported nausea, claiming the image triggered a primal discomfort similar to witnessing an injury. Another moment involved the blindfolded girl standing in the circle. The effect team used a low-frequency sound, barely audible but physically felt to create tension. This vibration, combined with flickering lights, caused a handful of audience members to panic, believing something in the room was shifting. Disney removed the sound layer after complaints emerged that children were crying not from fear of the scene, but because they felt pressure in their bones. The original Watcher design, a shimmering figure floating between dimensions, was created through double-exposed practical elements. When projected in full scale, the figure appeared almost organic. Some viewers described it as too human and moving like something underwater but aware of you. This reaction terrified Disney executives, who feared the creature would traumatize younger audiences, leading them to overhaul the design entirely. What makes this fact remarkable is that nothing in the film used digital trickery. The most unsettling images came from bending light, reflections, and the limits of human perception. The movie frightened people not because it showed too much, but because the effects felt real in a way the brain couldn't easily dismiss. In trying to create a believable otherworld, Disney accidentally tapped into something deeply uncomfortable, the uncanny sensation that reality itself was warping. Fact 6. The unsettling reactions of the child actors on set. For a film centered around a missing girl and an unseen presence, much of the emotional weight rested on the performances of the young actresses, yet their reactions on set often went beyond direction. Multiple crew members noted that the children seemed unsettled long before cameras rolled. They avoided certain corners of the house location, refused to stand alone in hallways, and frequently asked if someone else had been moving behind them, even when no crew member was present. Lynn Holly Johnson, who played Jan, later admitted that the atmosphere made her uneasy in ways she couldn't articulate. She said the silence in the woods felt too full, as if someone were holding their breath just out of sight. During one scene involving the attic, Johnson suddenly froze, insisting she had heard a whisper behind her, one that sounded like her own voice, but younger. Production halted for nearly an hour because she refused to re-enter the attic alone. Another young actress, Kyle Richards, experienced recurring nightmares throughout filming. She told her mother that she dreamed of a bright place where everything moved slowly, like underwater, closely resembling descriptions of the liminal dimension in early script drafts she had never read. Crew members brushed it off as coincidence, but the similarity was unsettling. Even stranger were moments when the children delivered performances that felt too genuine. In scenes involving fear or disorientation, the actresses displayed trembling hands, real tears, and breath patterns that suggested genuine anxiety rather than acting technique. Directors praised their realism, but several adults privately questioned whether the environment was affecting them on a deeper level. One crew member recalled a moment between takes when Johnson stared into the woods and whispered, "She's not gone, she's waiting." When asked who she meant, Johnson simply shook her head, claiming she didn't remember saying it. The production never publicly acknowledged these incidents, but many who were there believed the children weren't just reacting to the story, they were reacting to something the adults couldn't see. Fact 7. The real-world fears that inspired the creation of Karen. When audiences first learn that Karen vanished during a strange ritual in the woods, the moment feels eerie but fictional. However, the inspiration behind Karen was rooted in a real cultural anxiety of the era. Throughout the late 1970s, Western media was flooded with reports of missing children, unexplained disappearances, and a rising fear of cult activity. While many stories were exaggerated or unfounded, the atmosphere of uncertainty created a public fascination with the idea of ordinary kids being pulled into extraordinary, unseen forces. The screenwriters of The Watcher in the Woods drew heavily from this cultural tension. Early notes described Karen not as a symbolic victim, but as a representation of a generation lost between worlds both metaphorically and literally. Drafts emphasized her intelligence, curiosity, and sense of responsibility, traits chosen intentionally to make her disappearance feel like a tragic interruption rather than a random accident. Karen wasn't meant to be a typical horror trope. She was designed to embody the emotional weight of a real child who had never come home. Adding to the eerie tone, the costume department created Karen's blindfold and ritual garments using materials inspired by European folklore, particularly traditions involving vision quests and crossings between realms. These choices were subtle, but they anchored the character in a deeper symbolic tradition of the Chosen One, someone who unknowingly stepped into a space where human rules no longer applied. Even stranger, some crew members insisted that Karen's presence lingered on set, not the actress but the character. Props would go missing, only to be found in locations tied to scenes involving Karen's disappearance. One day, a blindfold used in rehearsal appeared in the woods, placed neatly on a stump no one had approached. Whether psychological or something more unsettling, Karen became more than a character. She became a ghost woven into the production itself, haunting the narrative from both sides of the screen. Fact 8. Ritual elements removed for resembling authentic occult practices. Disney expected a supernatural mystery. What they received was practically an occult manual disguised as a screenplay. Early drafts described the ritual that trapped Karen with remarkable precision, too much precision for studio comfort. The writers drew from historical European practices involving symbolic circles, blindfolds to represent sensory withdrawal, and the use of reflective surfaces as gateways. Scholars who later reviewed these drafts claimed the descriptions were alarmingly accurate, particularly for a film marketed to families. The ritual originally included 3 key elements: invocation of a liminal space, a symbolic exchange between participants, and a moment of deliberate disorientation meant to unbind perception. These concepts came from real esoteric traditions focused on crossing boundaries between physical and metaphysical realms. Disney executives quickly flagged the material as inappropriate, concerned that audiences might interpret it as a literal occult rite rather than harmless fiction. Entire pages of the script were rewritten to soften the implications. References to invocation became vague gestures. The symbolic exchange was replaced with simple hand-holding, and the reflective gateway, once an elaborate metaphysical construct, was reduced to a visual motif without explanation. These changes stripped the ritual of narrative coherence, but they also created an eerie vacuum. Without clear rules, the scene felt dreamlike and ominous, as if something essential had been hidden. Several crew members joked that removing the ritual's logic made it seem more dangerous, not less, because audiences could sense that something was missing. That gap, the absence of explanation, became a source of unease that seeped into the final film. Perhaps the strangest part is that some concepts from the abandoned ritual still appear in isolated shots. The blindfold, the circle, the mirrored distortions. These remnants create the impression of a puzzle with missing pieces, leaving viewers to wonder what the ritual originally meant and what its full version might have revealed. Fact 9. Deleted scenes that pushed the film beyond Disney's limits. Disney entered the project hoping to produce a supernatural thriller for young audiences, but several scenes pushed the film so far into the realm of adult horror that studio executives demanded their removal. These weren't graphic or violent sequences. They were psychological, atmospheric, and disturbingly ambiguous, far too unsettling for a company known for magic and musical numbers. One of the most infamous deleted scenes involved a longer depiction of the ritual that caused Karen's disappearance. The original cut lingered on the moment the circle breaks, with the wind rising violently and the camera lurching into disorienting angles. A silhouette barely human was said to appear behind the children, just for a frame. Test audiences reacted with confusion and fear, many insisting they saw something with a face, though no such face existed in the final cut. Another removed scene showed Jan wandering through the woods at dawn, where she encounters a figure partially obscured by branches. The figure doesn't move, yet its presence exerts an unnatural pull on the environment. Leaves rustle toward it, light bends subtly, and Jan's breath fogs even though the temperature is warm. This moment was described by the director as too effective, because it created a dread the rest of the movie couldn't contain. A third deleted moment featured the Alewood house during a power outage. As Jan moves through the dark hallway, the mirrors begin to fog over one by one, though no heat source is present. In the final mirror, a faint outline of someone wearing a blindfold appears behind her. Disney removed the scene after executives argued it crossed the line into ghost horror imagery that would frighten younger children. These scenes remain lost, surviving only in production notes and faint memories of those who witnessed them. Their absence helps explain why the final film feels fragmented, like a dream stitched together from pieces that once formed a more terrifying whole. Fact 10. The original Watcher design that felt disturbingly sentient. Long before audiences saw the final version of the Watcher, a glowing, abstract entity, Disney approved a creature design that was far more unsettling. Early concept art depicted a tall, angular being with elongated limbs, a translucent body, and movements that suggested both intelligence and hesitation. The creature wasn't intended to be a monster. It was something caught between dimensions, struggling to communicate through a physical form it didn't fully control. The effects team built models and prototypes that translated this idea into a practical presence using puppetry, layered gels, reflective scales, and air bladder mechanisms that created slow, pulsing motions beneath the surface. During test footage, the Watcher moved with a disturbing organic logic, like something trying to imitate human posture but always slightly off. It would lean forward as if curious, then retract abruptly when overwhelmed by light. Studio executives were horrified. The problem wasn't that the creature looked too frightening, it looked too aware. Early screenings with internal staff revealed that viewers didn't see the Watcher as an alien or spirit. Many described it as a conscious intelligence that shouldn't be here. This interpretation clashed violently with Disney's desire to soften the supernatural elements. Several employees insisted the footage felt wrong, not in a special effects sense, but in an existential one. As one animator put it, it wasn't a monster. It felt like something observing us with questions we didn't have answers for. Fearing controversy, Disney demanded the creature be reshaped into a more abstract light form. But removing its physicality created a new problem. The audience sensed the film was hiding something. The final Watcher appears more like a placeholder than a fully realized entity, yet the shadows of its original design linger across the film, most noticeably in the way characters react, flinching as if seeing a shape that we no longer get to witness. The real Watcher never made it to theaters, but its ghost remains embedded in every uneasy glance, every sudden gust of wind, and every distorted reflection that hints at a presence just beyond the frame. Fact 11. The studio meltdown that forced one of Disney's largest reshoots. The controversy surrounding the original ending of The Watcher in the Woods wasn't merely about tone, it became a corporate crisis. When the film premiered in 1980, audiences were baffled by the strange, chaotic finale in which the Watcher physically appears and exchanges places with Karen. The scene used the original creature design, flying rigs, distorted lighting, and frenetic editing that left viewers confused rather than terrified. Reports from theatrical screenings described people laughing nervously, covering their eyes, or whispering that the ending didn't belong to the movie. Critics called it incoherent. Parents complained that the climax felt too intense for children. And, worst of all, for Disney, many said the finale seemed unfinished, almost experimental. Executives panicked. Internal documents reveal that the board ordered an emergency recall of the film, a rare and costly move weeks after premiere. They mandated a complete reworking of the ending, including rewrites, re-storyboarding, and new effects sequences. This reshoot became one of the largest in Disney's live-action history, requiring significant budget increases and forcing the studio to renegotiate contracts with actors who had already moved on to new projects. Director John Huff's control over the film diminished rapidly. Disney brought in new creative advisors, including key figures known for softening darker material. Their mandate was to produce an ending that explained the supernatural elements clearly, removed the disturbing physicality of the Watcher, and reframed the climax as a hopeful rescue rather than a cosmic collision. The final version still feels uncanny, but for a different reason. It is the stitched-together remains of two incompatible visions. Where the first ending aimed for transcendence and horror, the reshoot aimed for clarity and safety. The result contains neither fully. Many scholars now argue that the original ending, however chaotic, was artistically closer to the film's intent, but Disney had already made its choice. Fear was acceptable, confusion was not. Fact 12. How changing the Watcher's form warped the film's reality. When Disney removed the original creature design and replaced it with an abstract, glowing form, they expected the film to feel safer. Instead, it introduced a new kind of unease, one rooted not in fear of the unknown, but in the suspicion that something essential had been erased. The Watcher's new appearance was created through layered optical effects, multiple exposures, and hand-painted animation techniques, resulting in a floating, luminous shape with no clear anatomy. The problem was not technical, the problem was narrative. Characters in the film still behave as if confronting something physically present, a being with weight, movement, and intent. Their performances were built around reactions to the original Watcher, whose presence on set had provided real visual cues. When that entity was removed, the emotional logic of the scenes shifted. Viewers sensed an absence that made interactions feel disjointed, as though the characters were responding to a ghost of the original film. This mismatch created what film theorists now call an aesthetic dissonance. The story points toward a creature with form, but the screen presents something formless. The ritual implies a powerful entity crossing dimensions, but the finale reveals an inexplicable light swirl. The film feels haunted not by the watcher, but by the version that Disney suppressed. Some editors admitted privately that replacing the creature forced them to cut or rearrange footage to hide inconsistencies. Entire reaction shots were removed. Dialogue implying physical interaction was deleted. The goal was to maintain coherence, but each adjustment pushed the film deeper into a dreamlike, impossible rhythm. In the end, the watcher became something neither the writers nor the director intended, a symbol of a film split between two worlds. One world belonged to the dark, daring version the creators envisioned. The other belonged to the sanitized version Disney insisted on. And the shimmering entity on screen is the residue of that fracture, a reminder of the shape that once existed and the shape the studio chose to hide. Fact 13. The ritual sequence, Disney buried for feeling too believable. The most controversial deleted sequence in The Watcher in the Woods involved a more elaborate version of the ritual that caused Karen's disappearance. In this original cut, the children's circle was lit by handheld lanterns that flickered unnaturally, even when the actors stood still. The wind intensified gradually, not suddenly, creating a sense that the forest itself was leaning inward, listening. The camera moved in slow arcs, mimicking the rhythm of breathing. What disturbed executives most wasn't the ritual's staging, but the symbols embedded in it. The lanterns were arranged in a pattern that resembled a protective sigil used in certain European esoteric traditions. The blindfold present in the final film was originally tied with 3 knots, each symbolizing a surrender of sensory control. And the circle wasn't closed by accident, it was a deliberate invocation of a transitional state. During internal screenings, several executives felt the scene came too close to depicting real-world occult practices. One even described it as a ritual filmed with unnerving sincerity. Parents in test screenings didn't complain about violence, they complained about the atmosphere. They couldn't articulate why, but many said the scene felt too real, as if it wasn't pretending. The moment that sealed its fate occurred when the wind abruptly died in perfect sync with the breaking of the circle, followed by a wave of silence that the sound team had not engineered. Crew members insist the silence was pure coincidence, but to viewers it felt intentional, a supernatural punctuation mark. Disney immediately ordered the sequence shortened and stripped of its symbolic elements. But removing its core logic left a strange residue. The final film still hints at ritual, still carries the shape of something ancient, but the meaning is gone, leaving behind a hollow space that audiences subconsciously feel but are never allowed to understand. The lost version of this scene has never resurfaced. Some believe it was destroyed deliberately. Others claim fragments still exist in a mislabeled archive reel, waiting to be rediscovered. Fact 14. The vision of a supernatural forest fire that was never meant to be seen. Early in production, the director envisioned a sequence that symbolically mirrored Karen's disappearance, a surreal forest fire that burned without consuming anything. The flames were created using layered optical effects, giving them a translucent, shimmering quality. They flickered around trees without igniting them, as though existing in a slightly different dimension. The shot was breathtaking, beautiful, terrifying, and deeply wrong. The idea was simple but ambitious. The fire represented the moment the boundary between worlds faltered, a visual metaphor for the fracture that swallowed Karen. Practical lighting rigs bathed the woods in an orange glow, while dancers holding reflective panels created the illusion of flames moving with unnatural intelligence. When Jan walked through the scene, the fire parted around her as if aware of her presence. During test screenings, the scene had an unexpected effect. Audiences didn't interpret it as a vision or dream, they believed it was literal, a supernatural fire responding to the protagonist. This reaction unsettled Disney executives. They worried viewers would think the film endorsed dangerous ideas about controlling natural forces or interacting directly with supernatural entities. More troubling was the emotional impact. The scene left audiences feeling disoriented and strangely mournful, as if they had witnessed something sacred rather than frightening. The tone was too grand, too mythic, overshadowing the rest of the film and creating expectations the narrative couldn't meet. Executives feared children might imitate the visuals, approaching fires out of fascination rather than fear. They also feared critics would accuse Disney of dabbling too openly in metaphysical symbolism. The sequence was ultimately removed, leaving the final film without one of its most visually arresting metaphors, but its absence is still felt. Viewers sense there should be an image linking the ritual to the forest, a moment when the world shifts visibly. Without it, the story feels like a puzzle with a missing centerpiece, the emotional bridge between the seen and unseen worlds lost to corporate caution. Fact 15. The 2-second shot audiences swore contained a real presence. Among the footage removed from The Watcher in the Woods, one shot has achieved near mythical status among those who worked on the film. It appeared in a sequence where Jan, exploring the woods near dusk, catches a glimpse of something moving behind a stand of twisted trees. The shot lasted less than 2 seconds, but viewers reacted with disproportionate intensity. The figure was never meant to be the Watcher. In fact, it wasn't a creature at all. It was a shadow cast by an asymmetrical branch formation external to the frame. But in motion, under the pulsing light effects designed to simulate dimensional instability, the shadow seemed to lean forward and retract, mimicking the movement of a breathing entity. During test screenings, multiple audience members gasped or cried out. One insisted the figure had eyes. Another claimed it changed shape as it watched the character. A third left the theater, shaken and refusing to re-enter. None of these reactions aligned with the filmmaker's intentions. Disney's review notes reveal that the studio feared the shot would spark urban legends or claims that the production had captured a supernatural presence on film. Such rumors were considered risky for the Disney brand at the time. Executives ordered the shot removed and replaced with a safer, more static version that lacked the ambiguous motion. Crew members later said that the audience reaction was the most honest fear the film ever produced. The terror came not from a monster, but from a brief moment where the world didn't behave as expected. The human brain filled in a presence that wasn't there, or perhaps noticed something the camera hadn't meant to reveal. To this day, the original shot is missing, absent from all known cuts and archival reels. Some believe it was destroyed. Others suspect it remains in a mislabeled container somewhere deep in Disney's vault, waiting for the right eyes to find it and confirm what viewers swore they saw. Fact 16. Why the 1980 ending was deemed too alien for theaters. When The Watcher in the Woods premiered in 1980, the ending that audiences saw was unlike anything Disney had ever released. Instead of a tidy resolution, the climax exploded into a surreal confrontation. The Watcher appeared physically, Karen re-emerged through a dimensional rupture, and the forest seemed to warp around them. The sequence was meant to evoke transcendence, an encounter between humans and an intelligence that existed beyond linear time. But what the filmmakers saw as profound, audiences interpreted as deeply alien. The original finale relied heavily on practical effects and optical superimpositions. The Watcher, still resembling its early humanoid design, floated toward the camera with movements that blended puppetry, aerial rigs, and distorted frame rates. Karen's return was staged as a moment of cosmic symmetry. She materialized slowly, her image flickering like a candle flame struggling against a draft. These visuals were ambitious, but their abstract nature left viewers confused rather than enlightened. Critics complained the ending felt incomplete, as though missing contextual scenes. Parents worried it would terrify younger children. Rumors spread that audiences laughed during screenings, not because the creature was amusing, but because the imagery was so unfamiliar they didn't know how else to react. Disney executives panicked, interpreting the confusion as a failure of storytelling rather than a bold stylistic choice. Behind closed doors, the studio concluded that the ending had crossed into territory emotionally inaccessible to mainstream viewers. It wasn't frightening, it wasn't comforting, it was alien, indifferent, and disorienting. Disney feared that if left unchanged, the finale would generate the kind of controversy that could damage the company's already fragile reputation during that era. Within weeks, the film was pulled from theaters, and the reshoot order was issued. The original ending, a rare attempt at cosmic horror within Disney's filmography, vanished almost overnight. Its disappearance marked the beginning of a decades-long mystery surrounding the 3 competing finales that would come to define the film's legacy. Fact 17. The banned alien ending Disney refused to release. Among the 3 endings created for the film, the most infamous is the so-called alien ending, long whispered about among fans but rarely seen in full. This version depicted the Watcher not as a shimmer of light or symbolic presence, but as a fully realized extraterrestrial. Tall, luminous, and unmistakably sentient, It carried Karen in its arms, returning her gently before communicating telepathically with the protagonists. The concept was bold. The Watcher wasn't a ghost or demon, it was a being trapped during a dimensional accident, mirroring Karen's fate. The exchange was meant to be compassionate, even majestic, but something about the execution unnerved executives. When Disney previewed the Alien ending internally, the feedback was instant and severe. Viewers described the creature as too physical, too knowing, too close. Rather than providing clarity, the presence of a humanoid alien raised new and uncomfortable questions. What rules governed its world? Why had it chosen these children? Was the ritual accidental or guided? The ambiguity felt dangerous for a family film. Worse, the alien's design emphasized its intelligence. Its deliberate movements and expressive gestures suggested a depth of thought that eclipsed the human characters. Instead of resolving the mystery, the creature seemed to open a door to a larger universe that the film wasn't prepared to explore. Executives feared the ending would spark controversy about Disney promoting extraterrestrial contact narratives, a sensitive topic during a period of public fascination with UFOs. They also worried the creature looked too alive, too uncanny, triggering an instinctive discomfort audiences couldn't articulate. Within days, the Alien ending was banned from theatrical release. Disney ordered it buried, replaced with a softer revision in which the Watcher was reduced to an abstract entity. For decades, the Alien footage circulated only as rumor, feeding the mythos surrounding the film. To many researchers, this ending represents the most intriguing version, the one where the film dares to suggest humanity is being observed by something neither malicious nor benevolent, just impossibly aware. Fact 18. The compromise finale that left the movie emotionally split. After pulling the original 1,980 cut, Disney spent months engineering a new ending, one that would tame the film's cosmic implications without completely erasing its mystery. The result, released in 1981, is the version most viewers know today. It is cleaner, clearer, and narratively straightforward, and yet it carries the unmistakable air of a compromise. The revised ending reframed the Watcher as a benevolent being trapped between dimensions. Instead of appearing physically, it manifested as a soft, glowing presence that communicated through voiceover and diffuse light effects. Karen's return was simplified into a moment of emotional clarity rather than metaphysical terror. The ritual became accidental rather than purposeful. The danger became temporary rather than existential. But what makes this version fascinating is how visibly it strains against the rest of the film. Performances shot months earlier no longer fit the gentle recontextualization. Emotional beats that originally aligned with cosmic horror now sit uncomfortably within a calmer, more hopeful tone. Viewers often sense an uncanny shift, as if stepping from one movie into another without warning. Disney knew this ending was safer but also weaker. Internal memos reveal that several executives openly disliked it, calling it didactic, simplistic, and artistically compromised. Yet they approved it because it posed the least risk to the company's image. The 1,981 ending also introduced new inconsistencies. If the Watcher was benevolent, why did its presence feel ominous throughout the film? Why did characters react with fear instead of recognition? Why did the forest behave as if resisting something powerful? The new finale attempted to explain away these tensions, but only deepened them. Ironically, the version meant to clarify the film instead heightened its sense of fragmentation. Fans and scholars now view the 1,981 ending not as the true conclusion, but as evidence of a studio wrestling with its fear of ambiguity. In trying to save the film, Disney created the strangest ending of all, a finale that reveals more about the studio's anxieties than the Watcher's world. Fact 19. How the film's withdrawal turned it into a lost Disney artifact. When The Watcher in the Woods was pulled from theaters only weeks after its 1980 release, the decision stunned industry observers. Disney had never retracted a film so abruptly. The official explanation was that the ending required creative re-evaluation, but insiders knew the truth ran deeper. The studio feared that the film's unsettling tone and the confusion surrounding its finale might damage Disney's already precarious attempt to redefine itself for older audiences. Instead of promoting the reshoots, Disney quietly allowed the film to vanish. Marketing materials were recalled, press screenings canceled, and interviews silenced. For nearly a year, The Watcher in the Woods existed in a strange limbo, not banned, not forgotten, but deliberately withheld. Fans who had seen it during the brief theatrical window began spreading rumors about the mysterious ending, insisting that the studio was hiding something too strange to explain. This absence became part of the movie's identity. While other Disney releases received television airings or home video distribution, The Watcher in the Woods remained inaccessible. The studio refused to comment on the reshoots, and no one outside the production team knew how drastically the film would change. As months passed, the original version grew into a kind of cinematic ghost mentioned in trade articles, whispered about among critics, but impossible to watch. When the revised 1981 version finally reappeared, it carried none of the marketing hype Disney typically used to reintroduce a film. Instead, it arrived quietly, almost cautiously, as if the studio hoped no one would ask questions about what had been altered. Viewers familiar with the 1980 cut immediately noticed inconsistencies. Scenes were missing. The tone was gentler. The Watcher had transformed. The withdrawal gave the film a mythic quality. People began speculating that Disney had suppressed the original cut because it hinted at real occult forces, or because executives feared the public would misinterpret the imagery. In reality, the truth was more corporate than supernatural, but no less fascinating. By trying to protect its image, Disney inadvertently created one of the most mysterious vanishings in its own history, a film lost not to time, but to caution. Fact 20. The 3 hidden endings that resurfaced decades later. For more than 30 years, most audiences believed The Watcher in the Woods had only one ending, the softened 1981 version approved by Disney. The existence of alternate endings became the stuff of rumor, fueled by cryptic interviews and scattered production notes. But the full truth did not emerge until the early 2000s, when archival efforts and DVD bonus features finally revealed the hidden material. What shocked viewers wasn't just that multiple endings existed, it was how drastically they differed. The 1980 theatrical ending presented a cosmic confrontation between dimensions. The Alien ending showcased a fully realized extraterrestrial returning Karen with a sense of solemn intelligence, and the 1981 ending attempted to reframe the story as a misunderstood supernatural accident. Each version reflected a different philosophy about the film's identity: horror, science fiction, or spiritual mystery. The rediscovery of these endings transformed the film's reputation. Scholars argued that the gaps between versions exposed the tension between artistic intent and corporate fear. Fans debated which ending represented the real story, while critics revisited the film with newfound appreciation for its ambition. Suddenly, The Watcher in the Woods was no longer dismissed as an odd Disney experiment. It became a cultural puzzle, a fractured artifact whose pieces offered insight into a studio struggling with its own boundaries. Even more intriguing was the realization that no single ending resolved the film's mysteries. Each conclusion revealed something different about The Watcher, yet none fully aligned with the eerie tone that permeates the rest of the movie. This inconsistency, once seen as a flaw, is now viewed as part of the film's haunting charm. The story feels incomplete because it belongs to multiple realities at once, just like Karen, suspended between worlds. Today, the 3 endings serve as a reminder that The Watcher in the Woods was never meant to be simple. It was a bold, troubled attempt to explore ideas far stranger and more metaphysical than Disney was prepared to handle. And in its fractured final form, it continues to watch its audience, inviting them to decide which truth they believe. Bonus fact: the lost Other Side sequence remains one of Disney's most mysterious missing reels. Among all the material created for The Watcher in the Woods, the most enigmatic is a sequence known internally as The Other Side. It was conceived early in production as the film's emotional and metaphysical centerpiece, a glimpse into the dimension where Karen had been trapped for decades. Unlike the various endings, which have resurfaced over time, this sequence has never been publicly released, and some insiders claim it may no longer exist. Yet those who witnessed it insist it was the boldest, strangest, and most evocative footage Disney ever attempted in a live-action film. The scene reportedly depicted a world without gravity or horizon, illuminated by shifting bands of light that behaved like living currents. Karen floated weightlessly, suspended in a place where time didn't pass normally. Her hair moved as if underwater, but the air around her shimmered with heat distortions. The Watcher appeared not as a creature but as a presence, an outline carved from negative space, visible only when the light bent around it. The effect was achieved through a mix of underwater filming, optical effects, and experimental lighting techniques that were cutting edge for the era. Accounts from crew members described the footage as hypnotic and unsettling. Karen seemed peaceful, yet the environment around her felt intelligent, as one technician put it. Another recalled that the dimension appeared to react to her emotions, brightening when she reached out, darkening when she recoiled. This level of abstraction made the scene feel less like fantasy and more like an intrusion into a place that wasn't meant to be visualized. Disney executives were alarmed. They worried the sequence would confuse audiences, overshadow the narrative, or provoke interpretations about death, the afterlife, or cosmic consciousness topics the studio wanted to avoid. The scene was removed before the film's first test screening, and the surviving footage was reportedly stored in a vault under an internal label that has since vanished from official archives. To this day, no confirmed frame of "The Other Side" has resurfaced. Some believe it was destroyed. Others suspect it lies misfiled somewhere deep in the vault, waiting to be rediscovered. Until then, it remains the most tantalizing secret of The Watcher in the Woods, a missing vision of the world beyond the veil. In the end, The Watcher in the Woods is more than a film with 3 endings. It is a fragment, an echo of the movie it once tried to be, shaped by fear, ambition, and the boundaries Disney refused to cross. Every missing scene, every altered creature, every unexplained moment leaves behind a shadow of what still waits in the dark. So now the question is yours. Which version do you believe? The one Disney released, the one they buried, or the one that slipped through the cracks between worlds? Tell me in the comments, and let's step deeper into the woods together.